Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Digital Leaders Show. I'm Dan Goodstein. And this week we're talking about headlines from our DEI Weekly. It's a curated selection of our favorite content for global digital leaders. It goes out to Digital Enterprise Institute members each week. Our goal is to discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader as we all transform into digital enterprises and a fully digital society. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 Central European Time on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Digital Enterprise Institute, as well as IRPA AI. It's the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association and peer-to-peer research network that provides education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher and author, an educator at the University of Maryland and Georgetown University, and formerly an advisor with EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan, as always. Good to see you again.
So you can check out some of our resources if you want to learn more about custom research projects or join our DEI weekly newsletter. You can do so at DEInetwork.com. Also check out our research site at DEIresearch.com for all things digital transformation. Carlos, last week we were talking about, I don't want to say we're predicting the future, but we were talking a bit about the heat around certain companies being accused of being monopolies, versus kind of conglomerates and that kind of discussion. And I think we made the case that it's kind of unfair. But then since then, the story came out about Ticketmaster and what happened with a Taylor Swift concert sale that's really shed some new light on this issue.
Right, and what we talked about last week was the harm test, right? If you think a company or if you claim a company is monopolistic or is a monopoly, or even if it's part of an oligopoly, you need to show the harm, right, to the average consumer. And we debated whether you can show harm in the case of Apple or you can show harm in the case of Amazon. In this case, it's not that hard to show the harm, right? We're talking about what is effectively a monopoly, which is Ticketmaster. And a little bit of history, right? Ticketmaster, as we think of it today, is really the result of two firms, right? It's Live Nation. This is a merger that occurred a few years ago between Live Nation and Ticketmaster. And the combined firm really dominates the large concert market in a way that I don't think almost in any other industry is dominated by one particular platform, right? The way they do the work is they will tie up both artists and venues. So you kind of work both sides of the street. Even if Taylor Swift had said, I don't want to do a concert in this venue, any big venue in America already has an exclusivity contract probably with Ticketmaster, so she doesn't really have any choice. Likewise, the venue can't, if the artist has a contract with Ticketmaster, the venue can't hire them without using Ticketmaster. So what they do is basically extract rents from artists, extract rents from venues, provide mediocre and a good day service, and then in essence, almost charge whatever they want to the average consumer. So I think you can make a case that this is a true monopoly in the classic sense of the individual consumer. It's harmed by its existence in its current form and the way in which it does business.
Yeah, it's worse than I thought. I always kind of knew this. Being a sports fan, your ways of purchasing tickets have become more and more limited over the years. But there's a couple interesting. So to me, unlike a lot of the examples we talked about last week, this starts to meet the criteria. I think, like you say, it's exclusivity. There really aren't any competitors certainly not at a national scale. I'm not as familiar with the international market, but in the U.S. For sure. And what was interesting about this for me is, like you say, there's there's this Live Nation angle, which not only do they manage venues, but they manage artists, right? And in her case, in the Taylor Swift case, they do not manage her. But it doesn't seem to matter. And there's some talk about maybe that's why this happened. I don't know. There's some conspiracy theories as well. But at the end of the day, you don't really have a choice, and so that's where it becomes very concerning. The other is that agree or not, the ticket space was made up at one point of 3 or 4 ticket providers and a long list of scalpers, right? In the olden days, it was like the guys who showed up in the parking lot or walked around outside. Now there's, ticket brokers and other things like that. And I also saw a related piece where, and I don't know if it's been, completely verified as of yet, but, it looks like Ticketmaster has actually been marketing to these ticket brokers, to essentially to scalpers, through a new program that they have, verified resale, right? They also put out StubHub, right? And so they eliminated the secondary ticket market. And so if you buy a verified resale ticket, you're buying it through Ticketmaster, and they're getting their cut.
Again, the second time, right? Because they got it in the first one. The other thing about this is that, as I understand it, and again, I'm not an expert in this particular merger, but one of the conditions of the merger, because everybody understood what was going to happen when this merger took place, was that the thing that Live Nation brought was the platform, right? Which is what Ticketmaster didn't have. And as I understand it, part of the deal was that that platform was supposed to be made available to competitors because they knew it was going to be a monopoly. For whatever reason, that hasn't happened. So it still remains a technological platform available only to Live Nation / Ticketmaster. And so the competition that's supposed to arise just never happened because the platform still remains a closed proprietary platform. And again, I think that it really is almost, they can sort of price right whatever they can get away with, and they can take from the artists and from the venue as much as they can possibly take without, I guess, upsetting people to the point where they just wouldn't do business with them at all, which is a pretty high bar, as we've seen. And in this particular case, millions and millions of people who thought they had a chance to buy a ticket were completely shut out of the entire process.
So yeah, and so it's not good for the consumer, which I think is the basic litmus.
About that, I haven't read one article in the last week that says Ticketmaster / Thai Nation. Right? It's, I love them. Right? This is a great. I don't. Please don't change. Right? I haven't had one. I haven't seen any argument from any consumer saying, "Boy, I hope nobody messes this thing up."
And you talk about price gouging and things, right? I mean, that's one of the issues. So yeah, and I agree with you. I'm sure I've had a couple interactions, although I can't say it's that makes me an expert. But customer service, why? Well, you don't have to, right? You own the market. Price, competitiveness, why? You don't have to. And according to one of the articles, it's also not theoretically even good for the artists. There was an old story that was on mainstream media. I think it was like 25 years ago, with the band Pearl Jam, who refused to do a tour because they couldn't negotiate with Ticketmaster a price point that they thought was fair for their audiences.
Right. And again, they can, in some case, depending on who the artist is, right, you have so much leverage, right? Swift have as much leverage as anybody. But if you're not Taylor Swift, I can imagine a bunch of other artists who'd say, well, we just don't think you should get that much of a cut. The funny thing about them is that the venue provides a value add, which is they built a building, they put seats in it, they make it comfortable, right? It's safe, whatever, an attractive place to have enjoy a show. The artist brings the talent and the show. Ticketmaster brings nothing, right? If you took them out of the picture, the venue could still function, the artist could still perform. Their value add is so minimal, and so there's just this very disproportionate sense of scale and the value they collect and the value, vis-a-vis the value they provide with respect to artists or venue, right? That's
Yeah,
that.
I think they would argue that they've invested in technology and the ticket management system. You know, the elimination of paper tickets to mobile. And listen, it's obviously benefited them to the extent that they can monitor fraudulent ticket issues, and like I said, limit and then monetize scalpers. So I think they have made significant investments, but to what end? And the other interesting part of this story is that this is if I don't know what the first court case or issue was with Ticketmaster, but I know the Pearl Jam thing that I saw was like 25-30 years ago. And so you haven't heard a lot about this. What's interesting about this is it's actually the fact that the technology failed that seems to have put this back in the spotlight. If you didn't have a 500 million Taylor Swift fans complaining right now, this probably wouldn't have seen the light of day. This issue.
The headlines, but there is a coalition to break up Ticketmaster Live Nation, right? Trying to do this in court. My pushback against what you said a minute ago, well, about this convenience is, so what? Let's look at the airlines, right? The airlines all give me e-tickets. I can get my boarding pass online. Imagine if when you buy a plane ticket, there was a company called Flightmaster, and Flightmaster said, that's great. You're going to LA. Your ticket is $800. Well, guess what? Pay another $100 of convenience fee, by the way. And someone can, and by the way, there's 12 guys reselling seats in coach. You go buy, right? So the technology isn't that special. If all the airlines can provide us digital automatic ticketing on our phones, right, which is just a seat on a plane. It's a venue that happens to move from one place to the other. Then I don't see what particular technological innovation Ticketmaster brings that justifies the kind of disproportionate power they wield this environment. There are other parallel markets where the same service is provided to consumers without this negative effect, monopolistic effect that you see in the concert business.
I will say though, Carlos, my counter to that is there's been a handful of instances where I've attended events at local venues that are not part of the big business world, local university, arts center, and other things, where it was not a good experience, right? There were issues with people getting duplicate seats and, still having to print out a ticket, or you just couldn't get a ticket because the system couldn't handle the demand or released the wrong ticket, right? So, I would say there is some benefit.
What if the reason that's the case is that no startup wants to enter this space because there's no point, right? So
the local university can't afford the fees, so they're not going, right.
Doesn't want to pay Ticketmaster a fee. If I'm a venture capitalist and I have an idea for an even better way of doing ticketing, right? I'm not going to do that because the moment I get to any kind of scale, I'm going to have Live Nation, Ticketmaster attorneys, right, knocking on my door saying you're invading my space. So does any startup want to compete with them? I imagine there are probably easier things to do. So they may, I'm not saying they are, but it wouldn't shock me to find that if researchers looked at the case, that the reason why even in those venues it's a bad experience is because of the effect Ticketmaster has on in dampening innovation that would benefit the smaller venues or venues who don't want to play with Ticketmaster.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, that's a far cry from some of the other examples we talked about last week that have been targeted,
right,
as monopolies. We talked about Amazon and others. The other one that kind of struck me this past week, that was also in the news, is Disney's new old CEO taking back the helm, and Iger was really probably most well known for his acquisitions, right? Which, took Disney from a pretty big multi-channel entity to, I think they're in almost every space. I mean, Walt Disney famously had this brilliant concept of a flywheel of different businesses back in the, I don't know, 50s, 60s. And it was really brilliant, especially for its time. You fast forward to today, they're in publishing, they're in movies, obviously. They own TV networks. They even own some news outlets, some former Fox properties. They've got TV providers like Hulu and Sky. They're in gaming. They're obviously in parks and entertainment and merchandise. They're also in licensing, where they license the brand to the local ice capades and other things. So they're in every space, and I question, how that's different, from Amazon and the like.
Yeah, we go back to the harm test, right? I think it's a lot easier to avoid Disney if you really wanted to than it is to avoid Amazon. So I would even say Amazon is closer to almost a must engage with scale, right? They're probably like 8 out of 10 for the average consumer. Disney, look, you don't want to get Disney, don't subscribe to Disney, right? Don't go to the parks, skip the movie if you don't want to. So I don't know that much about it to the extent that Disney's market share sort of percentages are, but it seems that while they play in a lot of spaces, most of those, except for local TV station ownership, which is highly concentrated, are pretty competitive spaces, as we see every day. So not so the case with Amazon or Apple, right, which are really oligopolies for the most part.
Well, I guess it gets back to, and I guess the point that I wanted to underscore when we talked last week was, how you define, you're talking about the harm element. There's some that, are trying to define monopoly as control over multiple, businesses or industries. And I think that that's a dangerous precedent in the U.S., especially because I actually would say avoiding Disney was possible maybe before Iger, but I don't think it is today. I mean, if you're a fan of Pixar, of Marvel, of Star Wars, of all the 20th Century Fox content. I watched Home Alone on Disney Plus this weekend. That was not originally a Disney movie, but they own it now, right? So I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to live a well-balanced life without some influence from Disney. But I'm not saying it's wrong. I think that it's okay because I don't think they have a significant market share in any of those channels.
We might add the innovation test here as well, right, Dan? Which is does Disney hurt innovation? I don't know. Well, if you're an old school Pixar fan, you might say they sure did when they bought Pixar, right? But generally speaking, my sense that I don't. Again, I'm not an expert in this space, so my general sense is that I don't see where claims are made that the way in which Disney operates hurts innovation or stops other entrants from getting into the market, right? There's never been more independent film and TV production ever than there is today. That's not the case with Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
Right. That is, I think it's a pretty clear-cut case that there are people who are staying out of that market who, because of the and innovation and benefit of the consumers being created because they exist. My sense is that the entertainment business, which is the majority of where Disney plays, right, it's a thriving, competitive, highly innovative space. So they just may not have enough concentration anywhere to be considered a monopoly, and whatever they're doing doesn't seem to be to the detriment either of industry players, right, or to the average consumer.
No, if anything, I think I think the opposite. I think that,
right, yeah.
Yeah, I think that Disney has been one of the biggest proponents of kind of tech enabled experiences. You look back to years ago in their parks, the Fast Pass system, which evolved into the Magic Bands, which evolved into their Disney Experience app that allows you to pre-schedule rides and experiences and order food. I mean, all the things we do as consumers with our phones today in real life, you were able to do it at Disney Park years ago. So they've been a big proponent of that. They're in the experience business, right? If you ask them, they're not in the even in the entertainment business, they're in the experience business, and so everything they do is innovative that way. And even even the Disney streaming services, and I think the reason why they acquired all those franchises that I mentioned, they weren't the first ones in the streaming business, but I think they've perfected it. I mean, if I look at the streaming world, I think you got Netflix, who was the early, maybe the Ticketmaster, but they didn't get the exclusivity that Ticketmaster did of the streaming space. And Disney, I mean, if at least early on, if you had a bunch of different streaming apps, it was very obvious that Disney and Netflix were a couple notches above the others, at least at the beginning.
I think there's also something to be said to the culture of the place, right? Disney was a client of mine back when I was a consultant, and the culture of the company, again, right? You generalize broadly, but my sense from the people who work with me within Disney was they liked working there. They liked the company. They felt proud to be a cast member, right, in the famous sort of Disney language. And it was a sense that not just employees, but there's this phenomenal fan base. My brother, I'm not a Disney person. My brother is, right? My brother loves all things Disney. And I don't think there's like I Heart Ticketmaster Club meeting in any city tonight. Yeah, I suppose if you're a shareholder, if you're a senior executive Ticketmaster, it's wonderful, right? But this remarkably caged goose that lays golden eggs whenever any star wants to do a show, wonderful. But again, right, for the average person, they operate in two different worlds. And Disney also has, the beautiful benefit of this amazing back catalog, right? This content catalog that goes back almost a century and is beloved of generations and multiple nations. So, but again, my sense is that Disney, for the most part, encourages innovation, seems to be a fine place to work. Certainly has taken a stand on social issues, right? That have wanted fans when other people kind of wanted to stay out of those frays. And so, yeah, if there are monopolistic issues with Disney, at least they don't seem to have the kind of impact that you have in a place like Ticketmaster and the concert world.
So, Carlos, real quickly before we get to the other main topic we wanted to talk about, there was more news, and this is a throwback to last week or the week before's show as well, but more news this week on kind of chaos in China and its effect on Apple.
Yeah, well, again, right, these moments come in China over the last decade or two, and they sort of seem to last for a week or two, where you have kind of this little bubbling of discontent here, but then the government is pretty thorough in its crackdown of the state and the technology infrastructure they have in place today now, which is even more than anything they've ever had before, right? That's unlike anything you see anywhere else in the world. So, right, the question is there any staying power here? What it does raise the question, if you're Apple, it's just that the firm lives off the iPhone, right? And the iPhone lives off of China. So therefore, Apple lives off of China. So where China goes, Apple goes. And it's the world's most valuable, within the top 50 most valuable companies, right? That entire valuation is based on China remaining a stable place to manufacture. If what we're seeing now is, look, there are some cracks in that foundation, then that's the strategic question for Apple. Now, it's exceptionally well-run company, so of course anything we can think about, they've thought about, and I imagine they must be looking at this and would imagine they have a plan B or a plan C if things get as bad as somebody could game out. They could get.
Yeah, maybe they do, and we're just not privy to it. But and obviously there's probably things going on, behind closed doors that we don't see. With Tim Cook apparently meeting with the president of China, so who knows? But
Right.
you wonder, with all the supply chain issues we've had over the last couple years, why any company would rely on any location for their flagship product. And we're talking like, I forget the number we mentioned a couple weeks ago. I think it's like 95% or a number like that percent of iPhones are made in China by one or two companies. So that seems on the outside, that seems risky, Carlos.
it's been the perfect place to do business for them, right? I think if you go back a couple of years ago, that movie documentary, the award-winning documentary, Academy Award-winning documentary, The Factory, that looked at sort of this culture clash between the American factory workers and Chinese factory workers. And you see the culture of the Chinese factory, right? The fact that most workers there seem to actually live on the compound, right? It's not like what we think of it here, is where you go home and go to a factory. This is a university. It's more like a university compound, right? You come, you live there, you work there. And so the government was relatively stable, society was stable. So the economics were right. So everything, it was the logical choice. If you start getting to the point where, right, COVID began to shift that, and if COVID returns China in a big way, and the population isn't willing to go through the draconian sort of measures, right, that were put into place during this COVID zero policy, then there is an issue. But that's always the issue with China. It's just a remarkable place from a historical standpoint, right, where you're transforming the society under tremendous control. And how much release do you give it? How much release do you take away? And there's always been this debate. At what point does the society itself say, we've had it? If that point ever comes, right? If that point ever comes. And maybe it doesn't, right? But maybe it's COVID. You know, history is weird because sometimes you think that are not going to be a big deal turn out to be the thing that catalyzes a huge change. You would say this is just a little resurgence of COVID, but what's underneath? It's like the Iran protests, right? I'm sure the people who stopped that young woman, I think, to harass her over the way because she wasn't wearing a hijab, the last thing they expected was this was going to be in the World Cup, right, reverberating for months and months to come. What is that even possible in a place like China, right? With the level of surveillance that it has. I was seeing yesterday in the news how there were policemen coming up to people in the street and asking for their phones. And they were taking their phones on the street and scrolling through the phone, looking for messages, looking for what they were reading. And the person would give them the phone. When you think about anywhere else in the world where somebody was up to you, a policeman, and says, "Hey, Dan, can I see your phone, please? I want to see if you're reading CNN or if you're reading Fox, right? And if you are, you need to come with me." That's inconceivable to us, but it is conceivable to them. But is there a limit to that? It's the question, right? Historically, you'd say not really, because people have pushed human beings to all kinds of terrible states. But maybe there is. Maybe you're either seeing another little bubbling of the pot that Xi and company will come in and close the lid and we'll forget about it. We will never talk about this again a year from now. Or you say, no, we'll look back and say, this is where the fissure started, right? And people began to say, enough is enough. Yeah. We don't know that at this point.
Interesting. So the main story we wanted to talk about, Carlos, was influencer marketing, the influencer marketing space, and what's I knew it was big, and we talk a lot about social media as well as marketing on this show, but the influencer industry reached 16.4 billion billion dollars this year. And the year's not even over. It's not quite. And according to this Harvard Business Review piece, 75% of brands have a dedicated budget now for influencer marketing, right? And not just kind of upstarts and tech companies, but the Coca-Colas and the Dior's of the world. And so the Harvard Business Review piece is highlighting some recent research where they were testing whether or not there's an ROI on this influencer marketing. And it's interesting to me because the short answer was yes, there is, but that a lot of companies aren't doing it ideally or in an optimized way. But what's interesting to me, and I love about it as a marketer, so much of what you do online that's not lead generation focused is often tough to track. And so not only did they kind of figure out a way to track it, but they had some really interesting takeaways.
And it's one of those things where it's what I call in my book persuasion factories, right? This is the term that I use, where you, instead of having the traditional, I hire some superstar spokesperson to deliver the message for me, you take that effect and you break it up into hundreds, even thousands of smaller players, right? And so what this is what you've got. It's a production line of persuasion, when it which is what they kind of have in mind, right? Now, what you see if you look very closely at it in the article highlights is that all persuaders or influencers aren't created equal. There really is a deep concentration, as you would expect, in those who have the largest numbers of followers, which is what grants kind of authority and kind of influence, right, on social media. And uh, what these people do is just they deliver the message, right, on behalf of the brands. And I think you're right. I think almost any major consumer brand, from cars to makeup to clothing, right, to electronics, has its stable directly or through brokers, because you can hire brokers now to do this for you, right? Well, they will. Urban Legend is a company I write about in the book, which is located close to where I am here in Virginia, right? You could hire them, tell them the message you want. They have their own internal marketplace called the Exchange. And so if you have a niche following of 2,000 people who love, pumpkins, and for somehow their message would be good for pumpkin lovers, right? Then you can say, hey, I have my 200 pumpkin growers, and what are you offering? And they'll say, well, we're offering 5 cents for everybody who signs up for a newsletter. And then, right, you sign up for the contract and you're part of this factory, right? So it used to be that you had to sort of build up the following yourself. That's how most people think of it. But there are exchanges now where even if you only have a small number of people, hundreds or thousands, right, that you can plug into this influencing machine, and the brands are, they're all in. And not just brands, right? Because these persuasion factories are being used by political parties, by PACs, right, by all kinds of people for all kinds of things. Now, of course, when you get the message from the influencer saying, hey, I just tried this new pumpkin fertilizer, you think it's coming from them. It really isn't, right? It's coming from the people who basically asked for the job, who bid on the job. And that makes it a bit fragile, right? And you see it in the article as well, which is a lot of this stuff is the fine line between, is this person influencing you towards something which they actually care about, or the person who wrote the biggest check? It's leaning towards, as it usually does, right, towards the check is what matters, not whether I really like product A, B, or C.
Yeah, so they refer to it as kind of the Goldilocks theory on a couple of these, right? Not too hot, not too cold, but you got to kind of be just right. But so what's interesting, right? They surveyed 2,400 influencers that are representing over 860 brands across 29 product categories, and are charging anywhere from $200 to almost $100,000 a post. And what they were able to determine was that for every 1% increase in influencer marketing spend, they saw an increased engagement of about 0.5%. However, they kind of broke it down, as you alluded to, into a couple different success and optimization suggestions, and they estimate that advertisers could actually increase engagement by 16%. That's a significant number, especially if you're paying $100,000 per post. So a couple other tidbits. You mentioned the number of followers clearly makes sense. The proportion of they talk about positivity. So you got to convey this kind of positive message without making it seem too fake or artificial. You have to focus on not too much content, but if there's not enough content, then it's not credible. And so they came up with this 5 posts a week benchmark. But the one that really kind of jumped out at me, Carlos, is is they found out that influencers that post a greater proportion of original content versus the brand told them exactly what to say and what to do had a much bigger effect, and that the ROI for posting announcements of new products was 30% lower than other posts.
The other interesting issue here is that it can be a fragile state. There was in the UK in the last week brouhaha over an influencer who had sort of has this sort of fantastic lifestyle that she sort of shares with her followers, and then she made a post where she said, "Oh, the heater in my house broke, and so I'm going to go stay at the Savoy Hotel for a few days." And there was all this blowback because it came across as quote unquote insensitive, right, to the inflationary issues that are happening in the UK. And she sort of doubled down on, look, I sell a fantasy, right? I sell a dream, and she's which then sort of, it's what is it? The mirror sort of cracks, right? You look behind like in the Wizard of Oz, where you look behind the curtain, and this sort of episode points that up to the fact that some of these quote unquote personalities, right, are kind of in a fragile world that it doesn't take a lot for this thing to sort of fall apart. So my sense is that the influencer thing will go down as there was the age of the influencer, and then it'll pass, because the fragility of the model to me, it seems kind of weak, right? It goes back to what was the book, I think Taleb's book, The Black Swan. There was an interview he gave afterward. He said a lot of futurists, what they do is they look into the future and they add things to it, right? Like, what if we had flying this or whatever, transporter beams? I look in the future and I look at what's going to go away, what looks fragile to me, right? And it may seem strong on the surface, but it's really, the thin ice thing, right? And I think that social media is one of those things that looks strong, but it lies on a pretty weak foundation.
So that's a good segue, Carlos. I'm really excited about our guest next week, who's an expert in that. So before we go, I want to tell people about that. Also, yesterday was Giving Tuesday, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the charity that you started as well.
Yeah, so we'll talk about our guests. We're excited to have Jason Steinhauer with us next week. Jason is the author of a new book called History Disrupted. It's a phenomenal book. I recommended it to people who follow me on LinkedIn. It's a book that influenced a lot of what I wrote about social media in my new book. And it is a history of e-history. So Jason sets out to look at how Wikipedia and others have changed how history is recorded and captured online, and both by professional historians and by amateur historians, of which there are many, and the interaction and the tensions between the professional historian kind of community and the self-designated, right? Although, and I would say that although it's a book about e-history, at least when I took it, I really didn't take it as just about that. I think it's really a fantastic examination of the rise of social media influencing in almost any field, right? He uses history as kind of the nexus for the conversation, but I thought it was a great illumination of how platforms like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter function from the inside, and what makes them tick and how they work. So we're excited to have Jason join us next week. And I will mention today is Giving Tuesday. So before we sign off, I will mention the E4S Foundation. This is a foundation I started. And what the goal of the foundation is to support journalism students in college. Right? Journalism is a profession in which, both Dan, you and I both started in this world, and we both believe that this is central to a functioning democracy and to enlighten citizens, right? And for us to be kept aware of what's going on. The best journalists play a vital role in keeping any democracy working. And so what E4S does, it provides critical financial support to students who are working towards a degree and a career in journalism, as was my late son. It was named in his honor. And I hope you'll take a moment, if you're a member, to look at the email that you received today and to check out the E4S Foundation at e4sfoundation.org. Thank you, Dan.
Great, Carlos. Thank you. And if you're watching and you need help, we're here to help. We don't just talk to each other every week for fun. We're here to help
Although it is
you.
fun.
It is fun. Yes. Thank you, Carlos.
Mhm.
And so, we're powered by this network, fortunately, of over 130,000 senior executives, subject matter experts, and academic leaders. So let us know what you're working on. If we don't have the answer, we usually know the person who does have the answer. And in the meantime, check out DEIresearch.com. Carlos, good to see you again. We'll see you next Wednesday for our guest episode.
All right, Dan. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.